So after all this, if you still think you can't get enough calories in, I've got some a little bit more dirty tricks for you. Hello everyone, my name is Shay. I'm a nutritionist and an international level athlete, and today we're talking about a guide for bulking. And I don't know how many people out there would be as sort of, I can't say certified, but I suppose qualified to give you a full guide to bulking. Because growing up, I looked malnourished, man. It wasn't good. And it took me a while to put on weight and figure out how to eat more because I didn't like eating. I found it so hard to eat even like 3,000 a day calories. Um, but man, when you follow through with all these things I'm about to tell you, it gets so much easier. So let's get into it. So before we get into how to eat more, the main thing you're messing up is you're probably not actually eating enough. You may have heard this before. You need to at least track for a few days to see what your calorie total is at the moment. I guarantee it's not high enough if you're struggling to gain weight. Out of all the ways to track, I do recommend Cronometer the most. It's the most accurate, it's easy to use, and it gives you a pretty good breakdown of your diet. I've got a whole video on that, but yeah, I just wanted to get that out of the way. Likely you're going to figure out what you're normally eating, and you'll want to throw, maybe 300 to 500 calories on top of that to actually bulk. So that's the main thing, but for a lot of you that might be here, that's probably not the problem. The problem is I don't know how to eat that much and still actually enjoy my life. So yeah, that's where the rest of this video comes in. One thing I wanted to touch on is it can actually be easier if you eat less meals. Now, I've seen some people online saying, oh, if you want to bulk up, you gotta eat like 7 meals a day. No, like that's, for most of you, that's probably a miserable existence. No one wants to do that. And when you're doing that, you're never actually hungry. You're just trying to force feed all these like repeated meals that you've already had 3 times that day, and it's just not a good time. Just throwing it in the microwave, watching it spin around as your soul gets crushed of like microwaved rice and chicken breast. Like, first of all, that's not even calorie dense, but yeah, well, forget about that. Basically, if you have fewer meals, right, your stomach lining gets temporarily stretched out because there's a lot more volume in the meal, and once you digest all of it, and then when you come around for the next meal, your stomach is still ready to house a lot of food, which means if you only eat like, say, twice a day, 2 monstrous, like 2,000 calorie meals each, it's actually somewhat doable, and it's just easier as well because bulking, it can take a lot of your time if you have to eat 6 times a day. Like all the preparation you have to do, you have to physically sit down that many times to eat as well. So I really recommend just fewer meals, like 2 or 3. And what this means as well is you can actually do fasting, right? It's a lot of people use fasting as a tool to lose weight. It can be done that way, but if you do prefer fasting and you don't want to give that up, as in intermittent fasting, you can still do that if you just eat twice a day. It's very manageable. As well, something that might make bulking a bit more enjoyable if you avoid backloading so much of your food towards the end of the day, because having a massive meal can impede on your sleep and your ability to get to sleep. And personally, I find when I've had a big meal right before bed, I feel pretty sluggish in the morning anecdotally, and some of the literature supports that too. So I would recommend trying to space it at least a few hours from bed if possible. Now let's get into how you can actually eat more food. So a massive point here is palate fatigue, right? If you eat the same thing, like so many calories worth of it, you're going to get so sick of it in that moment, right? Your hunger is going to completely fade away after your like 100th spoonful of whatever you've filled up your bowl with. So the way to get around this is just have multiple parts to the meal, or just have maybe 2 things that you can swap in between. Maybe you just even have like your main meal and then maybe something kind of sweet on the side that you can pick away at to sort of avoid this palate fatigue. And by doing this, you'll be very surprised that you can probably eat twice as much food, and it's not nearly as miserable either, because although you might feel yourself filling up, your brain isn't telling you to stop eating, because it's sort of like an evolutionary thing where you want to have a varied diet to get, good micronutrients, so take advantage of that. So now let's talk about food choices. What can you eat to actually, get the calories in? So we want to think about calorie density, okay? So first up, things that are high in water, like vegetables. Vegetables, they're not bad, but you're not going to be able to bulk on them, right? Certainly don't cut them out of your diet, but if you're trying to eat more, most of your calories is going to come from other things. Things that are completely dry in water are going to be more calorie dense because less of the weight is taken up by the water, and there's no calories in water, of course, so it makes it more calorie dense. So think olive oil, right? Absolutely no water, pure fat, good fat, unsaturated. And that's, one of the most dense things you can buy. So usually dry things are going to be, better. Olive oil is not dry, but there's no water, you know what I mean? And the second one is fiber. Again, I wouldn't recommend cutting all your fiber out of your diet. Same thing with vegetables. But the thing is with fiber, it's technically a carb, but we don't really get any energy from it. It's useful for your gut to maintain gut health, which has a lot of good positive benefits, but it's going to fill you up. It's going to get rid of your satiety for 0 calories, which, is not a great bargain when you're trying to bulk. So don't go out of your way to get high fiber foods. Because you're eating a lot of food, your fiber intake is probably going to be fine anyway. Just because even if it's just a small percentage, because you're eating so much, some of it's going to find its way in there, right? So after all this, if you still think you can't get enough calories, then I've got some a little bit more dirty tricks for you. So I mentioned olive oil. It's reasonably cheap per calorie. It's pretty cheap actually. And what you can do is you can first cook with it, and you can also add it afterward. Like, if you really want to be filthy, you can make foods quite oily before they get unpalatable, because olive oil has quite a mild taste. It'd be easier to do it with regular, not extra virgin, because then the taste might be a bit strong, despite extra virgin being slightly healthier usually. Another thing is understanding macronutrients and calorie content, right? So carbs and protein have 4 calories per gram, but fat has 9. So if you can eat higher fat, ideally unsaturated fats, that's usually going to be better. You don't want too much saturated just to maintain good blood lipid levels, but high fat diets are usually going to be easier to eat and more of because it's just more calorie dense, right? So keep that in mind, which makes things like olive oil pretty good. And this also makes nuts quite good. Some nuts can be expensive. If you go with peanuts, you can get a massive bag for not much, and they're pretty easy to throw into, just on the side on any meal, just a little bowl of them. One further, you can go peanut butter. It's pretty much usually, unless you're buying some weird kind, it's usually just largely peanuts with water sort of mashed up. You can maybe even make your own. But if you find a slightly more liquid one, you can actually just kind of spoon it into your mouth and swallow it with water. It's kind of disgusting, the thought of it, but it's actually okay. And you can get down like 800 calories in a minute after having a big meal, which is kind of overpowered if you're struggling. So that's something which, if you don't find disgusting is, and you're struggling, like, give it a go, man. And the last thing I'd say is don't get too caught up with protein intake, because usually if you're eating a lot of calories, it's the same thing with fiber. Someone's going to get in there. You're probably going to be eating higher protein regardless. If you try to eat really high protein, protein's usually more satiating than carbs and fats, which means it might be harder to maintain the calorie surplus. But, you got to play around with it. Ideally, you don't want to avoid it entirely, because then you're going to struggle to build the muscle that you want. So just keep that in mind. Still eat moderate protein, but when you're bulking, you probably don't need to go out of your way for it. And as far as tracking goes, you'll want to evaluate your diet and look at how many calories are in the foods that you're habitually eating. And if things are very low and they're not really adding too much to your diet as far as micronutrient density, it's best you avoid them for bulking, because they're just going to fill you up for not much. And as well, if there's things that are, decent foods that are higher in calories in your diet that you like, maybe bump them up if you're trying to gain weight. So that's all from me today. I hope you learned something, and I wish you well on your bulk. Don't make it too dirty, but with these tips, it shouldn't have to be. You should be able to eat reasonably well and get the calories in. So hope you enjoyed. I'll see you next time.